Why do some people readily accept authoritarian rule, while others resist it? This presentation explores groundbreaking research at the intersection of behavioral genetics, neurobiology, and institutional psychology to answer that very question. We'll examine the origins of political compliance and resistance, and where that takes us as a country. Let's start with a striking data point. Research shows that nearly 1 in 4 Americans, roughly 25% of the population, expresses a willingness to accept a leader who bypasses elections or Congress entirely. This isn't a fringe phenomenon. The well-being of democratic governance is fundamentally challenged by a widespread willingness within the population to accept centralized, non-accountable authority. The question is, why? The central finding of this research is what we call the integrated model of compliance. It works like this. Genetic predisposition, traits like social dominance orientation and conscientiousness, provides the raw material. But genetics alone don't determine outcomes. When those predispositions are combined with chronic environmental conditioning across a person's lifetime, through institutions like schools, workplaces, and religious organizations, the result may be political compliance. Nature loads the gun. Nurture pulls the trigger. Our biology plays a critical foundational role. Think of the brain as a scale, constantly balancing two competing forces. On one side, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, is more active in individuals who feel a deep need to protect the status quo for self-preservation. On the other side, the prefrontal cortex handles higher-order reasoning, decision-making, and what researchers call moral courage. Here's the key takeaway. Chronic stress and trauma cause functional deficits in that reasoning center, shifting the brain towards self-preservation and submission. The biology of fear can override the learned capacity for moral courage.
One of the most powerful internal processes at work in the population is a condition called learned helplessness. This is a psychological state in which individuals conclude that their actions simply cannot influence outcomes. Here's how it develops. Chronic exposure to stress, or adverse childhood experiences, reduces the physical volume of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive thinking. The result is a painful transformation, a shift from active coping to passive submission. Over time, individuals internalize the belief that the orders of those in power are beyond reasonable question. They are unavoidable laws of the world. It becomes socially inappropriate to question the decisions or opinions of authority figures.
While biology sets the baseline, the institutions we consistently interact with act as powerful amplifiers. The first amplifier is education. Traditional schooling often operates on a transactional mode of instruction, where students are treated as passive recipients, and knowledge is applied by the institution. Questioning is controlled, there is no challenging the curriculum, and no intellectual agency that leads to students owning their learning. Layer on top of that the infrastructure of education. Large, centralized school districts that mirror corporate command and control models. Efficiency is the goal. Disconnection is the method. The combined outcome? Students are taught from an early age that rigid hierarchy is the norm, that uncritical compliance is rewarded, and that independent thought may be humored, but is neither expected nor welcome. The second institutional amplifier is religion, though the interaction here is more complex. On one hand, hierarchical religious doctrine can activate what psychologists call system justification theory, the motivation to defend existing social systems, even when they are observably harmful. When the status quo is framed as divinely ordained, challenging it feels not just futile, but morally wrong. Taken to its limit, excommunication is one of the great human fears of all time. On the other hand, there is a powerful counter-tradition. Religious communities operating in the prophetic tradition have historically provided safe spaces for civil resistance, trusted leadership, gathering places, and a moral framework for challenging injustice. The critical variable is independence. A religious body that is financially dependent on the state loses its capacity to resist it. The third, and arguably most pervasive, amplifier is the modern corporation. The structure is stark. Most adults spend the majority of their waking lives inside organizations that are legally structured as autocracies, not democracies. You do not vote for your manager. Decisions flow down from the top. And the catalyst that makes this so psychologically potent is economic precarity, shortened job tenures, variable pay, and financial insecurity. Pervasive debt amplifies the fear of disemployment. Workers facing this uncertainty adopt a conforming, obedient mindset as the appropriate behavior necessary to survive. And here's the insidious outcome. When submission is practiced day after day as a rational survival strategy, it stops feeling like compliance. It begins to feel natural.
Classic democratic theory suggested a positive spillover, that participating in workplace decisions would build civic skills that citizens would then carry into their political lives. But the research reveals the opposite is happening. The absence of thought ownership at work teaches non-participation, and that lesson spills over into civic life as well. Citizens who have never experienced meaningful agency in their professional lives never develop the habit of democratic participation. Citizens become resigned to having no voice. The result extends beyond the ballot box and leads to acceptance of the gradual erosion of democratic institutions. When autocratic overreach comes, it meets little resistance. Worse, it finds a warm welcome.
All of these circumstances connect into a self-reinforcing cycle, what political scholars call the conditioning corruption feedback loop. It works in 4 steps. Step 1, internal conditioning. Workplaces and schools condition citizens for obedience and dependency. Step 2, external corruption. Corporate political spending degrades the legitimacy of government itself, creating a deficit of representation. Step 3, exploitation. Authoritarian figures step into that vacuum of dysfunction, offering the simplicity of centralized decision-making and disconnected control as the only solutions. And step 4, acceptance. Citizens already conditioned to accept hierarchy in their economic, educational, and employment lives find the autocratic model familiar, even comforting. The loop tightens, like a noose.
But resistance is also real and present, and it is rooted in specific, cultivatable psychological traits. Democratic resilience rests on 3 pillars. First, political efficacy, the genuine belief that your actions matter politically and that the system will respond. This is the direct antidote to learned helplessness. Second, critical consciousness, the ability to recognize and challenge assumptions about inequality and power, a capacity closely linked to the personality trait of openness to experience. And third, moral courage, the willingness to defend your values despite personal risk, the trait that enables whistleblowing, activism, and altruism. And a final note, independent religious institutions, operating in the prophetic tradition and free from state financial dependency, have historically provided the social infrastructure, the trusted spaces and leadership that makes organized resistance possible. The research draws a sharp contrast between 2 psychological profiles. In passive compliance, the core belief is that action is futile and the system is unavoidable. Thinking is uncritical, with reduced executive function. Authority is sourced externally, from leaders, divine will, or economic forces, and the roots lie in a genetic preference for order, amplified by environmental conditioning. In active resistance, the mirror image emerges. Action is seen as impactful, and the system as contestable. Thinking is characterized by intellectual autonomy and critical reflection. Authority is sourced internally, from moral conviction and independent reasoning. And the basis is cultivated civic virtues, combined with the personality trait of openness. These are not fixed destinies.
They are outcomes, shaped by the environments we create. In the end, the path taken is a choice: authoritarian rule or freedom.
So what do? Advocates for representative democracy propose concrete structural interventions. The first is the corporate power reset. States possess sovereign authority over the corporations they charter within their charters, without requiring a constitutional amendment. The second tool is the ultra-virus doctrine, applying legal principles to hold corporate directors personally liable when they violate those charter limits on political activity. The intelligent leverage of state charter authority can rebalance the scale against the outsized weight of corporate political spending. Alongside structural reforms, advocates for representative governance call for transformations in behavior and culture. 3 interventions stand out. First, critical pedagogy, replacing the passive, transactional model of teaching with an approach that encourages students to interrogate institutional bias and develop genuine intellectual autonomy. Second, workplace democracy, mandating or incentivizing worker co-management, what researchers describe as a form of behavioral therapy for learned helplessness. When people discover that their actions lead to real collective outcomes at work, they rebuild the belief that they have agency, and that belief carries into their civic lives. Third, reducing precarity, strengthening labor protections to eliminate the baseline economic fear that makes hierarchical submission feel like the only rational choice. Together, these reforms target the psychological conditioning of passive compliance at its source.